3 weeks after my father died, the Jamaican consulate called. They said, "Do you know who your father was?" My father drove a bus for 30 years. That is all I knew. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I need to know someone is listening to this. My father drove a city bus in Detroit for 30 years. Route 16, the Dexter Corridor, 5 days a week, sometimes 6, from 1984 until he retired in 2014. He knew every stop, every light, every pothole on that route. He knew the regulars by name, or by stop at least, by the corner where they got on and the corner where they got off. He was, by all accounts, a reliable and decent man who did his job without complaint and came home at the end of the day and ate dinner and watched the news and went to bed. He never talked about Jamaica. That is the thing I keep coming back to. He came here from Jamaica in 1977 when he was 24 years old, and in 40 years of being his son, I heard almost nothing about his life before Detroit. A few fragments: his mother's name, the town he grew up in, a place called May Pen in Clarendon Parish, which I found on a map once as a child and looked at for a long time trying to imagine my father there. A mention, once, of working on boats. That was all. The before was sealed off. The after was the only part I got. He was not a cold man. He was warm in the specific ways he was capable of being warm. He came to my games. He helped me with homework when he could. He told the same 4 jokes for 30 years with the same complete sincerity each time, like they were still funny, and the fact that I had heard them all 100 times was my problem. He laughed easily. He had opinions about everything. He loved my mother with a straightforward devotion that made it look easy, which I understand now was not easy at all, but was a choice he made every day. He just didn't talk about before. I stopped asking when I was maybe 12 years old. You learn when questions don't have answers. He would deflect, redirect, change the subject with such practiced ease that I eventually stopped noticing he was doing it. I filed Jamaica under things my father kept to himself, alongside whatever he dreamed about that made him occasionally wake up at 2 in the morning and sit in the kitchen alone until it passed, alongside the locked drawer in his workroom that I never saw him open. He died in September. Heart failure. He was 70 years old, and he had been slowing down for a year. Less energy, more tired, shorter days, but nothing that announced itself as the end. He died on a Sunday morning, in the chair in the living room, with the television on and his coffee on the table beside him, which was the most him way he could possibly have gone. I was 43 years old. My mother was 68. My sister flew in from Atlanta. We made the arrangements and we said the words and we got through the first weeks, which are somehow both very long and very fast. 3 weeks after he died, the phone rang. The caller ID said Jamaican Consulate, Washington, D.C. I almost didn't answer. I thought it was a mistake, a misdial, something that had nothing to do with us. We had no business with the Jamaican Consulate. My father had lived in this country for 46 years and had been an American citizen for 32 of them, and as far as I knew, had had no connection to the Jamaican government of any kind. I answered. A man introduced himself. His name was Fitzgerald. He had a formal, careful manner. And he asked if I was the son of Clarence Everett Williams, formerly of May Pen, Clarendon Parish, Jamaica. I said, yes. He passed away 3 weeks ago. A pause. He said, I'm very sorry to hear that. We had hoped to reach him. We have been trying to reach him for some time. I said, reach him for what? He said, Mr. Williams, I want to ask you something directly. How much do you know about your father's life in Jamaica before he emigrated? I said, Almost nothing. He didn't talk about it. Another pause, longer this time. Then he said, "Your father was a fisherman in his early 20s. He worked out of the Port Esquivel area. On the morning of March 4th, 1974, there was a maritime accident. A boat capsized in open water during an unexpected storm. 14 people were in the water. Your father was on a vessel nearby. He went into the water 14 times. He pulled out 14 people. He did not lose a single one." I sat down. Subscribe, because I am about to tell you everything they told me, and everything I found in that locked drawer afterward. He said, "The story was reported in the local press at the time. There were attempts to recognize him officially. He declined all of them. When he emigrated 3 years later, the file was closed. The Jamaican government has been attempting to reach him periodically over the years to offer a formal recognition, a national honor, which he was entitled to and which was never awarded because he never responded to any correspondence." I said, "He never mentioned this." Fitzgerald said, "I am not surprised to hear that. From what we understand of your father, from the accounts of the people who were in the water that day, some of whom are still living, he was not a man who wanted to be recognized for it. When reporters came to speak with him afterward, he told them he had done what anyone would have done, and that was the end of it as far as he was concerned. 14 people. He had gone into open water in a storm 14 times and pulled out 14 people, and then declined all recognition, and 3 years later moved to a different country and spent 30 years driving a bus and never said a word." I called my mother. She was quiet for a long time after I told her. Then she said, "The drawer, in his workroom, the one that was always locked. We had to have a locksmith open it. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed with age in Jamaican patois that I couldn't fully read, but my mother could, haltingly. A photograph. My father young, 21 or 22, standing on a dock, squinting into the sun, not smiling, looking directly at the camera with the expression of someone who does not understand why he is being photographed. A small medal on a ribbon, Jamaican colors, an inscription on the back that Fitzgerald later translated for me as, "For courage in service of life." He had kept the medal. He had kept the newspaper. He had locked them in a drawer. He had not talked about them for 46 years. I called Fitzgerald back. I told him what we had found. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "The families of the people he saved have been hoping for many years to have the chance to express their gratitude. If you are ever willing, there are people who would very much like to speak with you." I said, "I would like that." There were 7 of the original 14 still living. I have spoken with 4 of them on the phone. Their English was better than my Jamaican patois, which was essentially non-existent, and 2 of them had children who helped translate. They told me about that morning, about the storm coming up fast, about the boat going over, about the water, about a young man in another vessel who took off his shoes and went in. One woman, she was 81 years old, she had been 19 when it happened. She said, "I want you to know that I have had 60 years of life because of your father. My children and my grandchildren exist because of your father. I want you to know that we have thought about him every single year." I said, "He never told us." She said, "I know. He told the reporter afterward that there was nothing to tell, that anyone would have done it. I have thought about that for 60 years too, that he believed that he went home and he went on living, and he believed there was nothing to tell." My father drove a city bus in Detroit for 30 years. He came home every day and ate dinner and watched the news and told the same 4 jokes and loved my mother and came to my games. He was a reliable and decent man who did his job without complaint. He had a locked drawer in his workroom that we never saw him open. I knew him for 43 years. I did not know him. Or I knew the man he had decided to be in this country. The man who set down what had happened in 1974 the way you set down something heavy after carrying it a long way and walked forward without it, and built a life that was quiet and ordinary and sufficient and his. He didn't want to be the man who had done something remarkable. He wanted to be the man who drove the bus and came home and ate dinner. He got to be that man for 30 years. I have the medal on my dresser now, the small one with the inscription on the back, for courage in service of life. I look at it in the mornings. I think about my father at 21, in open water, in a storm, going in for the 14th time. My son is 16. He knew his grandfather as the man with the 4 jokes. The same ones always, told with complete conviction. He is old enough now for the rest of the story. I have been telling it to him in pieces, the way you tell a child something large, not all at once, but in layers, over time, until the full shape of it is visible. He said, "Why didn't Granddad tell us?" I said, "I think he believed that what he did was just what needed to be done. And once it was done, it was done. He didn't see the point in carrying it around." My son thought about that. He said, "But it was a big deal." I said, "It was. He just didn't think it needed to be his big deal. He thought it belonged to the people whose lives it was." My son is 16 and he sat with that for a long time. Then he said, "I want to be like that." I said, "Then be like that." My father drove a bus for 30 years. Before that, he went into open water 14 times. He never said a word. He thought anyone would have done it. Maybe the most remarkable thing about him is that he believed that. The drawer is open now. He would have hated that. He would have told me to close it and change the subject, and told one of the 4 jokes. I miss him every single day. My mother called me the night after the consulate. I had not told her yet. I was still processing it myself, still sitting with the locked drawer open on the work table, still looking at a photograph of my father at 21 that I hadn't known existed. She called to check on me the way she calls every few days now, and I answered, and she asked how I was doing, and I didn't know where to start. I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something about Dad." I told her everything. The consulate, the 14 people, the storm, the medal in the drawer, the newspaper clipping she couldn't fully read, but whose photograph she recognized immediately. She said she had seen that photograph once, years ago before they were married, and had asked him about it, and he had said it was nothing, just a thing from a long time ago, and changed the subject. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I always knew there was something he carried that I wasn't allowed near." I thought it was grief, a loss, maybe, someone he had left behind when he came here. I didn't know it was. She stopped. She said, "I didn't know it was this." I said, "Did you know about the drawer?" She said, "I knew the drawer was locked. I never asked about it. 30 years of marriage, and I never asked because he had a way of closing off from questions he didn't want to answer, and I had learned not to press. I always thought someday he would open it himself. I always thought there would be more time. There is a specific grief in learning something about a person after they're gone that you could have learned while they were there. My mother has been sitting with that grief since September, and the consulate call did not make it simpler. It just gave the grief a different shape. Instead of mourning a man who kept something from her, she is mourning a man who was more than she fully knew. Both true, both impossible to hold cleanly at the same time. I flew to Jamaica in November, just me, alone, which felt right. My mother offered to come, and I told her I needed to do this first trip by myself. I needed to stand in the place he came from and try to understand something about the before that I had spent 43 years not knowing. I went to Maypen first. I drove out from Kingston through the interior of the island, through the green hills and the small towns and the roadside stands selling things I didn't recognize, and I thought about my father making this drive in reverse, leaving this place, heading to the airport, heading to a country where he would spend the rest of his life driving a different kind of route. Maypen was smaller than I expected and larger than I had imagined. I found the street where he grew up. I had his mother's address from an old letter in the drawer, an address for a woman who had been dead for 20 years. But the street was still there. I stood on it and looked at the houses and tried to picture him as a child, which was something I had never been able to do because I had no pictures from that time, no stories, no material to build the image from. I went to Port Esquivel. I stood at the water. The Caribbean in November is very blue and very calm, and I stood at the edge of it and thought about a morning in March 1974 when it was neither of those things, when a storm came up fast and a boat went over and a 21-year-old man took off his shoes and went in. 14 times. I tried to imagine it. I am 43 years old and in reasonable shape, and I looked at that water, and I tried to imagine what it takes to go in once, let alone 14 times, in a storm, for people you don't know. I couldn't imagine it. I called Fitzgerald from the dock. I told him where I was. He said, "Your father used to fish from a dock not far from there. He would know those waters very well. That would have made it possible. He knew the waters. He knew what needed to be done." He went in. Then he spent the next 46 years driving a bus and telling the same 4 jokes. One of the families sent me something after our phone call. The family of a woman named Doris, who had been in the water in 1974 and had died of natural causes at 78 years old in 2019, 1 year before my father. Her daughter sent me a photograph. Doris and my father standing together on a dock, taken sometime in the late 70s, a few years after the accident. They are both smiling. My father is looking at the camera with the same expression as the newspaper photograph, slightly puzzled by why anyone would want to document this moment. On the back, in Doris's handwriting, Clarence Williams, who gave me 60 more years. I had that photograph framed. It is on the wall in my hallway, across from the photograph of my father in his bus driver's uniform, the one my mother gave me after he retired. In one photograph, he is 20-something and standing on a dock in Jamaica, having just given 60 years of life back to a woman he barely knew. In the other, he is 60-something in a Detroit Transit Authority uniform, having just completed his last route on the number 16. Same man, both true. My son came to see the photographs when he visited last month. He stood in the hallway and looked at them for a long time. He said, "He really never told anyone?" I said, "Not a word. Not to your grandmother. Not to me." He said, "Why?" I said, "I think he believed that what he did wasn't his to keep, that it belonged to the people whose lives it was, and once it was theirs, he had no claim on it." My son looked at the photographs again. Then he said, "I want to be like that." I said, "Then be like that." He thought about it. He said, "It's harder than it sounds." I said, "Everything worth doing is. My father drove a bus for 30 years. He came home every day and ate dinner and watched the news and loved my mother and told the same 4 jokes. Before that, he went into open water 14 times and brought 14 people back. He never said a word about it. He thought it was just what needed to be done. The drawer is open now. He would have hated that. But I think I have decided to believe that somewhere in the part of him that put that medal in a locked drawer instead of throwing it away, that kept that newspaper clipping for 46 years, that kept a photograph with Doris's handwriting on the back, somewhere in there, he hoped someone would find it. He kept it. That means something. That means he wanted it to exist somewhere, even if not out loud. The drawer is open now, Dad. We found it. We know who you were. We have always known who you were. We just know more now.